Today, I'm with the co-chairs of the Critical Mineral Institute for our Critical Minerals Report podcast. And today, Jack, we're going to start with your recommendation, which is to discuss the U.S. pulling out of the Mexico-U.S.-Canada trade deal and how this will impact the critical minerals sector generally.
We all have to understand the mechanics of this. For the U.S. to announce it's pulling out is not as dramatic as it seems, because there's a 10-year window for this withdrawal. And so, not that the U.S. hasn't withdrawn, that's correct, but the total withdrawal will take 10 years, and I don't know the details. I'm sure that things won't just come to a halt in 5 minutes. They're probably staged to be reduced and ultimately to zero. The problem here is that this really emphasizes the two government systems of the North American two nations. In the United States, in the next 10 years, we'll have two, perhaps three presidential elections, 5 elections for Congress, and we don't know what the next administration or the next Congress will do about this. And so I don't see any way to predict the future of this. Now, turning to Canada, I well remember Prime Minister Clark, who served 28 days and under the Canadian parliamentary system. And then we had Prime Minister Trudeau 10 years. So what I'm trying to say politely is that there's no way to know how this is going to affect anything. What it does do is tell us what the politicians are thinking. Clearly, Donald Trump is an isolationist, and he's returning to the trade policies of pre-World War II. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing for the world or for the United States. But my opinion, as I've said many times, is that Canada needs to have an independent trade policy from the United States. And I stand with that. And I'm looking forward to seeing how Prime Minister Carney handles this situation.
Mel, I'm certain that you have a few comments. Would you like to add anything?
Well, I'm going to start by agreeing with Jack on two fundamental things. Trump administration is determined to pursue a mercantilist economic policy, where the strong survive and the weak are eaten by the strong. And that is the fundamental rule of trade. So I 100% agree with Jack on that. And I also agree that while, this is a typical bold statement by the administration, and particularly by the president himself, it is subject to override. However, I would add that there are some defining consequences here. Number one, the whole reason that originally we got into NAFTA way back when, 30 years ago, was in order to provide security for business, a stable trilateral structure that businesses could count on for making long-term investments. And therefore, businesses did so. They wrote out the changes when NAFTA became USMCA, and indeed there were many improvements made to help businesses gain greater security to support long-term investments. There were changes in laws in all 3 countries that provided better investment protection, just as one example. So that's one consequence. The United States, on one hand, is talking about the importance of reshoring or nearshoring. Well, guess what? The president has just indicated that he doesn't want relationships with either of our 2 near shores. There's no business security in that. There's also no inducement for our neighbors, either north or south, to continue investing in the United States. And that's a very costly impact. One concrete example in the state of Arizona, Canada is the largest foreign investment agent, and that amounts to over $1.5 billion annually in revenue for the state of Arizona. Final consequence is one that Jack touched on. This gives every incentive to both Canada and Mexico to vigorously pursue their own network of international trade. And oh, by the way, to form their own bilateral agreement bypassing the United States.
In the last 2 weeks, there was a lot of major corporate news, starting with the Energy Fuels acquisition of Vacuumschmelze for, what was that, $1.9 billion, Jack? What are your comments on this acquisition? Good deal or not?
I think it was a very good deal. And we need to remember that Vacuumschmelze is the oldest and largest rare earth permanent magnet manufacturer in the Western world. When I say Western, I like to point out that China and Japan are the world's leading sources of magnets. But outside of those two countries, the next one was Germany. Now, Vacuumschmelze was purchased by an American fund and moved to South Carolina, I think 3 years ago. And now Energy Fuels has purchased that company. I think for Energy Fuels, that was a perfect acquisition. And Energy Fuels now becomes the only credible vertically integrated rare earth permanent manufacturer on this side of China. So I think it was an excellent idea. I have no comment on the price. I wouldn't know enough about those companies to evaluate that. But as a strategy, it's fantastic. As a tactic, it was perfect.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. It follows on very easily with the conversation with ASM in Australia as well, securing the feedstock to make sure that their rare earth processing capability is fully utilized, and then feeding that onwards into the magnet structure. So clearly there's been a lot of thought given to this holistic structure. Kudos to Energy Fuels.
Any comment on the ongoing saga between USA Rare Earth and MP Materials?
I have to say, I think the Chinese are laughing all the way to the bank, because you have the supposedly two largest rare earth contenders, shall we say, in the rare earth battle of the West. And instead of concentrating on building up their capacities, and here's a revolutionary thought, maybe even cooperating where possible in order to achieve maximum efficiency, they prefer to be in court litigiously chewing on each other. Stupid.
Jack, you want to put your oar into the MP Materials litigation against USA Rare Earth, and I guess now USA Rare Earth has responded.
I just have one comment. What's amazing to me is all of this blather about the fact that both of these companies are trying to catch up with the Chinese, who not only developed this technology to its current form, but did it about a generation ago. So what we're talking about here is the reinvention of the banana split with the discovery it needs bananas.
Well, I think it was you that actually commented to me that, you know, they're putting themselves on the grid for the export controls that China is now deploying. They're identifying companies that they will not work with, etc. A lot of China news this week. So, you know, Mel, do you want to start with the export list and the hit list that China has now updated on who they will not do business with?
Absolutely. If you remember in our last podcast, one of the comments that I made was, if the West continues demonizing China and forcing it into a corner, that China is going to become much more offensive. That so far it was playing defense. This listing is a good example of a warning shot, once again, from China, that, hey, you're keeping up the way this behavior is going. We are going to keep tightening the screws. And when we shut off the funnel, you don't have an alternative. So lay off. I think it's perfectly clear.
Jack, do you agree with Mel?
Yes, I think, in fact, that the Chinese are simply stating that they're implementing a policy they've had for the last 10 or 20 years, the same policy that all nations have. Theoretically, you don't export anything to a potential competitor that will increase their ability to compete with you. And everybody forgets China's a member of the WTO, the World Trade Organization. There are rules. These are perfectly consistent with the rules of the WTO. But Mel is right. The Chinese they're just fed up and they're saying, you know what? What's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. And that's all that's going on here, notwithstanding all the smoke coming out of Washington.
Staying on the corporate news for just a minute, the Aluca announcement on the $1.15 billion rare earth production moving forward. Mel, any comments on this?
You know, in a bad news world, we take good news where we can find it.
Okay, so you see it as a positive. Jack, Aluca, positive, negative comments on this deal, please.
Aluca has all the appearances of being able to move forward to become a downstream producer of, let's say, more advanced rare earth products that are coming out of the ground. The problem I have with that is, where is this stuff going to go? Because the Australian market is tiny, so it would have to be exported. China's not going to buy rare earths from Australia. That doesn't make any sense at all. So the real markets for them would be North America and Europe. And I haven't seen any announcements about anything like this. So I'm curious, where is this stuff going to go if they do produce it?
Of course, Jack, they may be
If I
replacing.
could just jump in with an additional comment there. I think it's important to keep in mind the interactions of the Commonwealth. So Canada would be the natural marketplace for this Australian product, and the agreements are already in place to facilitate that.
Okay, well, that's the natural bridge from this conversation is Lynas. Malaysian authorities reportedly block Lynas rare earths refinery expansion. Who wants to talk about Lynas and what's going on in Malaysia?
Tracy, I think this is very premature, this type of announcement, and indicates the lack of understanding of the journalists rather than anything about Malaysian or policy. It's very, very common when a company has to provide documentation or reports to its government that there's a delay. This is what governments do all over the world. In fact, that's their business. Bureaucrats have to have something to do. The idea that I didn't see the announcement from the Malaysian central government that they're cracking down on Lynas. They've been doing that especially about radioactive materials for the last 15 years. So this is nothing new. In fact, what's interesting to me is that it indicates that Lynas is serious about what it's doing.
Well, Mel, I think you mentioned to me you're going on the road and you will be in Malaysia here in this next month. So maybe you can be our eyes on the ground. See if Lynas will give you a tour. I'll reach out to Amanda. What do you think, Mel?
Actually, I mean, it would be very helpful for somebody to see where the work in progress is. But I think it's more essential that we take a look at what could be going on with the Malaysian government. I think it's no secret to anybody. They would be under a lot of pressure from China. And they also are under a lot of pressure to maintain control within their own country. The radioactive issue, I think, has been one that's easy for them to seize upon. It is a legitimate concern, worldwide from most perspectives. So that wasn't surprising. It really goes to the question of motive. What is really happening here? Are they trying to extract additional value add from Lynas? Are they trying to find a way to impose additional governmental fees? Or are they, most insidiously, genuinely trying to destroy this project in order to provide an additional opportunity for China?
Well, radioactive, of course, Trump. The Trump administration is set to loan $17 billion to speed deployment of 10 big nuclear reactors in the United States. Seems to me, Mel, you should take that one first.
It's a decision that has to happen. There's really only two alternatives given the weakness of the U.S. Power supply. and the disparity between the rate of demand growth and the rate at which capacity can be added in a conventional sense. So the best two options are geothermal and nuclear. The United States so far doesn't show that it has any great technology and or interest in geothermal, even though that's a very viable possibility in the western part of the country. So nuclear makes the most sense. Now, what was surprising to me was that there wasn't a specific encouragement for the modular nuclear reactor industry, part of the industry, because that is really the way that we could get the best bang for the taxpayer buck and bring that power onto the grid in the most efficient and rapid manner possible. I didn't see that, so I hope that the intention is not to build, huge megastructure monsters again.
The real problem here is that this $17 billion sounds like a lot of money, but it's less than the cost of construction of one plant. So what they've done here is seed this. They basically paid for the planning of those plants, not their construction. And there's one little problem that's a huge problem. The United States imports 96% of the uranium it burns in its reactors. Now we're going to add to that, so it'll mean that we import 98% if these are ever done. The real problem in America is our total dependence on the kindness of strangers for our uranium. So I really don't understand why this is not being addressed.
I was just going to add to Jack's comment that today I'm sitting here in Wyoming where we're trying to build 4 additional uranium mines right now, and 3 of them are already fully permitted. Now, we obviously would need something on the order of, another 10 at least, somewhere in the country, if not in Wyoming. But we need to go down this road in states that are more mining friendly so that projects can be pushed forward quickly enough. But there's still always going to be that disparity between, as I mentioned, the rate at which demand for energy is rising in this country and the rate at which we can do something about our creaky electrical grid.
All right, we're now at the point in the Critical Minerals Report where we're going to ask you some headlines to get your comments, thumbs up or thumbs down. Jack, starting with China plans whistleblower hotline to help it catch critical mineral smugglers. How about you start with that one?
I think that this is going to impact China a hell of a lot more than it impacts the United States. Chinese lawbreakers are rather severely treated. And the fact that they make it an announcement like this indicates they are really cracking down and they want to frighten people who do break their laws.
I agree with that 100%. But, the Chinese have always had a wonderful history of successful smuggling. And I think that when you put out rewards for whistleblowers, all the smugglers need to do is up the ante and pay more for the silence that they're already earning.
China's been all over the news this week. China imposes export controls on 40 Japanese entities as tensions with Tokyo rise. Mel?
I think that Japan's new undersea mining initiatives are causing some nervous reaction in China. But more importantly, I think that what Japan is doing in terms of improving its military capabilities is drawing a lot of ire from China.
You know what this shows you? That whatever the Japanese are doing, it's working.
Speaking of that, China also detained 2 Japanese nationals over alleged rare earth smuggling. I'm not sure how that happened. What did they do? Throw some magnets in their suitcases? Jack, any comments on this news headline?
It's more likely the subordination of Chinese trading companies. What I think they found is that these fellows were effective in getting stuff out without the appropriate licenses. And again, this is showing, as Mel said a moment ago, this is historically the way business is done in China and Japan for the last 4,000 or 5,000 years. Nothing new about that. What is new is that the Chinese are making examples and particularly focusing on our allies in Japan.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. And it's one way to hit the smugglers where it matters, in their pocketbooks. if you start arresting their illicit customers.
Mel, Congo pivots westward under cover of cobalt controls. Did you see any updates through your Congo associates this last week that you can comment on?
Well, I don't think that it's any additional pivot to the West. I think that the Tshisekedi administration is hanging its hat very firmly on the Washington peg. What is failing to take place is a proactive response from Washington to the door that Tshisekedi is trying to keep open.
Now on to my favorite part of the Critical Minerals Report podcast, and that's billionaire tracking. This week, Gina's Reinhardt's new lithium mine to rival world's biggest producers. It seems that our billionaires are out there acquiring as many critical mineral companies as possible. Any comment on what Gina is up to, Jack?
I think that our biggest mistake in journalism is thinking that being a billionaire means you can't make a mistake. I think the implications of what I'm saying are clear.
You know, I have to agree with that. I think that the tendency to run out and buy the next shiny thing is not always as productive as one might hope.
So let's parlay this into the obvious trillionaire with Elon Musk and his SpaceX operation. Mel, it's always been my contention that SpaceX is just a clever cover for his acquisition ploy for critical minerals globally. Any comments on SpaceX and Elon Musk this week?
My best comment on the gentleman in question, the dubious gentleman in question, and his SpaceX operation is that, ironically, a lot of the current valuation price when they went to market was based on an exoneration from the IRS. And depending on his relationships with the administration, that exoneration could disappear at any time, leaving SpaceX without a rocket to shoot.
I have one comment. I think that Elon Musk and P.T. Barnum will go down in history, each representing their own centuries.
Speaking of billionaires, of course, Donald Trump. Donald Trump had quite the piece drawing his family's alleged relationships into the critical minerals market in the New York Times. And as well, the New York Times did a lovely feature on Almonte this week. Does anyone have any comments on the New York Times seemingly increased interest in tracking the critical mineral sector, Jack?
I don't know anything about why they do that, but I do want to tell you that Almonte is not the only tungsten company operating in Korea. This is what people don't understand. There is a domestically owned and operated company that's also moving along, but it's focused on supplying Korea. I think Almonte is a very good company. They know what they're doing. What I'd like to know is, where is this tungsten going to go? Because unlike other countries, Korea strictly determines where anything produced in its domestic area goes. So that'll be interesting. It's a great idea. The question is, economically, why did it take 30 years to reopen a tungsten mine if tungsten is so important?
Well, Jack, how about we try and get you set up with an interview with Louis Black and Mel? I think Amanda, of course, is retired, right? She's no longer the CEO for Lynas, so you would be doing an interview with Paul LaRue. Let's have you do that with Paul. Do you have any comments on the New York Times piece, which was titled "The South Korean Mine at the Center of America's Tungsten Push"? So the article suggests that Almonte is the Hail Mary for American supply chain of tungsten, Mel.
Yeah, right. I think that Hail Marys are few and far between these days. But in commenting on that, I'd also like to add a comment to your prior question. Kudos to the New York Times for asking a fundamental question that everyone should be asking themselves, which is, all of this money is taxpayer money. Are we going to get any bang for our buck whatsoever from these massive amounts of deals and investments that are flowing out the gates? Are the best candidates being picked, yes or no? So coming back to Almonte, is that actually the best candidate to be the Hail Mary for American tungsten? And I would argue that No, for one simple reason. We are essentially supposedly trying to build shorter and more secure supply chains. I'm sorry, South Korea lives in a really bad neighborhood. The day that China wants to shut down anything coming out of South Korea, it will shut it down. So if we want a Hail Mary, maybe we need the USMCA because we need tungsten out of Canada and we need tungsten out of our own dirt. Thanks very much.
All right. So perhaps the White House is considering this, Mel. There was a story sent to me this week titled "White House to set to host weapon makers amid stockpile worry." And I know we love discussing stockpiling, don't we, Jack? You want to comment on the trend for stockpiling again?
What's interesting here is that the White House is going to the end user to somehow emphasize its need for natural resources. And then the end users are depending on the White House to finance this kind of thing. And keep in mind that all of the minerals dug out of Arizona or British Columbia are only decorative unless they're processed into things that the end users need. The systems integrators that our military industrial complex are called, they need the most highly technical forms of these materials, and they don't produce any. They buy those things. None of them produce them. So for the U.S. government's lack of expertise in processing to be discussing a lack of expertise in processing of these fellows is what I would call a cluster F. I'm sorry, and I'm too polite to expand that, but that's what's going on. This will result in nothing at all, as usual.
So I want to take a slightly different slant here because, this administration does not like to reveal the coherence that may or may not exist within its various announcements. But let's take a look at a couple of things that could be related here. So we want to have stockpiling. The way it is currently being defined, it's a great money-making engine for somebody somewhere because the government wants to go out and essentially buy cheap from the mining companies, throw the stuff into a warehouse somewhere, and then decide what price it will sell that material for to the next stage in the process, whether that be processors or someone else, maybe overseas. So let's link that up for a second with the announcement that the Army has now been the first to come out publicly and say, we are going to open some of our military bases to put processing facilities on. This is, of course, done deliberately in an attempt to speed up the construction of processing by bypassing almost every regulation on the books that currently affects the mining industry. Now, if we assume any kind of modicum of intelligence, there could be some connectivity there because you also have to site your storage warehouses someplace secure, unless we want to get into the same level of Chinese smuggling, a la USA. So, not that I like it. I personally don't think that stockpiling is the way to go because, among many other things, it's an effective economic deterrent to mining companies to actually sell into the global market. But, okay, maybe there's something else going on here.
One last comment. The use of military bases for any kind of processing has been around as long as I can remember. It's a good idea. Okay. Why? Because there's one agency of the United States government that doesn't have any authority on a military base. That's called the EPA. And that will solve a whole lot of problems for permitting and regulating. However, if anyone thinks the environmentalists won't figure this out or already did last Thursday, wait till you see the reactions in Congress and in the law courts. This is never going to happen.
I'd like to thank you both for joining us for the Critical Minerals Report podcast. Our co-chairs from the Critical Minerals Institute, you both are constantly traveling, speaking to a wide range of audiences, from governments to institutions, on critical minerals. I'd like to end our Critical Minerals Report by putting you both on the spot. Jack, I want you to ask Mel a question, and Mel, I want you to ask Jack a question. Jack, you're in the driver's seat here. Ask Mel a question, please.
Mel, you're doing quite a bit of traveling. Where are you going to be going in the near term?
Well, actually, Philippines, Vietnam are definitely on the list. Malaysia's potentially on that list, along with Indonesia. So parts of the world that I have not actually had the opportunity to visit before are popping up on my calendar, and it's quite exciting. So, Jack, my question to you is, if there were no Chinese smugglers, would the prices of any of the rare earth materials change materially?
Oh, I don't think so. I think that all of the prices we hear quoted out of China and that part of the world are just made up. It's my opinion that most of the people who report these things can't tell the difference between a spot price and a contract price. And that in my lifetime, I've never known of any real seller or buyer of exotic materials to tell everyone else, especially their competitors, what they're paying or what they're selling it for. So I don't believe any of this.
I'd like to thank you both. And for those of you interested in finding out more about the Critical Minerals Institute, please go to the following website. Thank you, Mel, and thank you, Jack.